Hi, and welcome to Jung at Harp. Today we are going to talk about the vulnerability of expressing emotions when you want to connect. I'm Deborah Henson-Conant, and this is Kathleen Wiley. I'm a composer and performer, and Kathleen is a Jungian psychoanalyst. We both play the harp. That's why this is called Jung at Harp. And we are here to talk about this in the context of human connection and music.
Yes.
So this came up, this whole idea of expressing ourselves emotionally when we want to connect and the vulnerability and what might happen, in that I'm teaching a class that's called holiday video cards or video holiday cards that teaches people how to do this sort of formula for connecting. And I created a formula because it's often difficult for us to connect, especially with music. So I made a very simple formula anybody could do, which basically begins with turn on your video. You're going to make a video for someone you love. This is to be able to connect with the people you love. You turn on your video, you hit some kind of grounding note, you hit some kind of flourish to make you comfortable and to connect with the instrument. And then you connect with the camera, you lean forward and you say, Joe, I wish I could be with you this holiday season, and since I can't, I want to send you something from the voice of my fingers and my instrument that I hope you'll enjoy. And then you connect over to the instrument, kind of bringing their eyes with you, and then very comfortably you play whatever you're going to play, you're going to play at your level of ability. And then you end, so let's say, this big flourish. All these things this is so technically easy. And then you turn back and you say, happy holidays. And that's it. It's very simple. Literally, somebody who doesn't even play the harp could do those gestures: ground, flourish, play some notes, flourish, connect. It's all about connecting. And as I was trying it out in Harp Time Live, which is an event I do every week. People were saying what would be hard for them. And many people were saying it would be so hard for me to just speak into the camera. How would I connect with the people that I love? And that started making me think about the whole idea of what happens when we want to connect with love. And are we going to get derision? Are we going to really connect? What's going to happen?
Well, it's always a question mark, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
because derision can be so subtle. It can be as
Mhm.
subtle as somebody not responding or saying, glad to see your harp abilities are improving, or who knows? You don't know when you reach out. And this actually came up because in the academy we were working on this too, and one student had presented one as a project, and we were giving it feedback, and it was wonderful. And she wrote to me right afterwards, and she said, should I just give up? She said, I felt so vulnerable and exposed. And what she'd done was wonderful. I mean, it was fun and funny and wonderful and personal. And I realized, wow, when we actually put our hearts out there, we are gonna feel vulnerable and exposed, and we're gonna want to stop. I mean, I can relate to it so much. It has nothing to do with what our abilities are.
Right, right. Yeah, one of the things that um, you say often, and we pick up on, that again I'm struck with this morning, is that the whole purpose of the holiday card is connecting with
Right,
someone.
right.
And I think about in my own work with my analysis, Jung says when everything else is resolved, what we are left with is the need for human connection. And so often the need for human connection gets equated with love, which, as I said before we got on camera, we then have to try and define love. And even St. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 never quite tells us what love, I mean, he tells us a lot about the characteristics of love, but so I think that maybe what we're talking about is that kind of, if I think about it developmentally in terms of how our own emotional and mental sense of self develop is that the way we first get a sense of connection to ourself is through someone mirroring us, through someone responding to us. So, an example for me in my adult life, because this goes on all the time, is yesterday we met with our dog trainer. We have a new puppy. We've had 3 months, and she's a rescue. And so that anyone out there who's had a rescue dog knows there are specific challenges to a rescue dog. And one of the things I realized yesterday while the trainer was here is how much we have made her the center of the house. And how determined she is. She's the center of attention all the time. And with John and I, we love her and indulge her, and she's just become a part of our relationship. But having someone else come in allowed me to see something about myself, connect to something about myself and the impact of what I was doing that I didn't realize. That without that response from the other person, the human connection, I would not have seen. Now, the trainer was very human, meaning she was present to me in a compassionate way, in a non-judgmental way, and just this is what we're seeing. This is how this is what's happening. There wasn't criticism, there wasn't advice, there wasn't, oh, you should do this differently. It was just in the being together and sharing the moment and interacting with each other and with the dog, Gigi, that I learned something about me. And I think that the human connection allows that. The problem is so often people who look like human beings don't act like human beings to each other. That instead of being present and sharing the moment and creating something together, they do criticize. They do give derision.
Right.
They do push. They do say, oh, there's something wrong with you. This didn't happen. Or, they put demands on us and insist that we should be ready to give them things we're not ready to do. And so I think that we're getting into a very subtle distinction, but there are a lot of people who in my mind really aren't yet human because they haven't connected to themselves with compassionate presence or what I would call love, so they can't connect with other people in that way.
Well, it's funny because as you were writing, as you were talking, I wrote down, I am a rescue dog. In the sense that,
Yeah.
you know, well, I don't know in what sense. I mean, but you all, this is really interesting what you're talking about. I mean, when you say someone's not all human, but 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 to be a rescue dog is to be human. I mean, to be that person. Let's talk about like what that means. And I want to. You said something earlier that I think is important here, but I'm not sure. You said relationships or communications. Relationships either help us heal our childhood wounds, or they re-trigger them. And I don't know if that's part of this conversation too, because I'm thinking every one of us is a little bit like a rescue dog.
Yes.
And there's so much we talked about just before, because you were also talking about if you're giving a heartfelt communication to somebody, are you giving it as an adult? Are you giving it as a little kid who's needing approval, or are you giving it as someone who's really giving? So it seems like there's all these things, but I think they all relate. And in this season that's coming up, when we are so disconnected and we are going to have to find ways to communicate and connect and give love, and it is so scary,
Right.
it seems like all these things are at play.
No, they all are at play because, part of what happens, well, let me say this. In any given moment in time, we are where we are. So I'm here right now in this moment with who I am now, but I am also here with everything inside of me that I've ever experienced and all of the perceptions and automatic interpretations and meanings I've made of that. And then all of the work I've done of consciousness to look at those things so I can that the ones that are harmful can be transmuted. So at any given moment in time, there's so much going on inside of us other than what we think is going on in our ego. And so if I sit down at my harp and I make a holiday card to send someone and express a sentiment to someone, I don't know how they're going to respond. And if there is a history of some conflict with that person or a history of hurtful interactions, then I need to also know by putting myself out there, I may not get back what I want. And I think part of how we protect our vulnerability is we really do stay conscious of, okay, I do want to offer this, I do want to give this, and a part of me does want to get this back. And if I do, great, and if I don't, how am I going to take care of myself?
So it sounds like what you're saying is separating the giving, the reaching out from any expectation. Like if and maybe also have a contingency plan when something comes back that either not what we expected or maybe even worse, exactly what we expected.
Right. And if it is exactly what we expected, then I think we need to do two things. We need to look at is is there a history of this with that person? Um, does objective reality say, yes, that's an inappropriate thing to say? Or is it getting filtered through that internal critic or rejector who's going to put a spin on everything?
Okay, so who's beating us up, I guess? Is it us?
Yeah. I mean, where's the source? Is it really this outer person that said that? Or I'm thinking about something again that happened in the last week for me. And, a situation occurred, and neither of the people involved meant anything negative towards me. But a couple of days later, man, my internal persecutor had just spun it. and, and I could see what was happening, and I knew it, and my whole self, my more conscious self, could say this is what's going on, but it didn't stop the spinning. And as one of my analysts used to say, I just had to go for the ride on the roller coaster, and I hate roller coasters. I mean, I just had to go for the ride, breathe through deeply. No, neither of these people had done anything wrong. That what had gotten stirred up was my insecurity, my inferiority, my sense of, oh, I didn't really know what I was doing. Sounds like I could have sent a Christmas card, doesn't it, with my heart? and I made it through that. It took me about 2.5, 3 days for all that to settle down internally. So in reference to what we're talking about, that's an example of something where the vulnerability that I was feeling and the pain around that was self-inflicted by my own internal filters and the processing and spin I was putting on the event and what had happened. And so this is what makes human connection complicated and sometimes seemingly impossible to happen, because to really have a human connection, which I'm going to say in this moment means a moment of meeting where we are both together fully raw and naked in who we are. We're
Wow.
there with all of our emotion, and we meet and
Wow.
we both feel it, and we give birth to something together, you know? And in that moment, when that happens, we aren't orchestrating it with our ego. The vulnerability is we've let go to just show up fully.
Oh,
And yeah, go
so,
ahead.
so if I were now I'm thinking about this thing I'm going to be teaching people to do, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a landmine here. I'm sending people off to. I'm like, okay, so next thing, how do people protect themselves? How in the holiday season or whenever you're giving a message of love, a communications of love, how do you prepare yourself? Like, let's just say this, you're going to send a video card. You're not the greatest musician in the world, and, you're nervous and your tech isn't great, but you want to love, you want to send the love. How do you protect yourself? How do you protect yourself from just feeling like I just did the stupidest thing ever? And like, how did you? And I just realized I'm realizing I'm trying to protect myself from people coming back to me like, how dare you teach me how to do this? This just was terrible.
um, well, so my mind is circling back to what you said about how you taught the formula for the Christmas holiday card.
Right.
And the starting point was grounding
Hmm.
and a grounding note.
Right.
So I want to say that how you protect yourself is you ground. And just like with your harp and what you're going to play on the harp, you ground with a note that's usually in the bass register. It's usually in bass or middle. We ground in our own larger self. So whether you have a mindfulness meditation practice or a centering prayer meditation practice or an insight meditation practice, or you do movement work, or you do Tai Chi and Qigong and work with your breath to center and ground in your own center, start by grounding in your center, where not only the desire for human connection is present, but also the gut awareness of when danger is there and when it isn't, and the head awareness of what we know about ourselves in relationships, what we know about our history with the people we're extending ourselves to, and let the three of those things inform what you share. Because to really be authentic in the moment, we not only have to show up with our heart and what we associate with love, but we also have to show up with our gut and our primitive emotion, our fears, our anxieties, and we have to show up with our head and our capacities to see and observe and make sense and differentiate and discern. And when the three of those things come together, then I think there's an opportunity for one's own whole self to flourish in the process, regardless of the other person's response. Because if I ground and I check in with head, heart, and gut and the totality of me, I'm going to see, wow, this is really triggering that young part of me that wants mommy's approval. Or wow, this is really triggering that part of me that felt dropped way back when this happened with my lover, or this happened with my boss, or this happened with my teacher. And that holding of that consciously begins to allow something to shift. And, it's kind of like that's where the internal music of soul happens. Just like we both know, sitting down and playing notes off of a page isn't making music. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can make it make music, but yeah, it's
Yeah, the music comes from something that happens in the process.
that's right.
So the human connection and the connection to ourself is something that happens in the process of that head awareness, consciousness, discernment, differentiation, the heart, emotion, and the gut. Yeah.
So this is making me think of a bunch of things, including actually tying those things to specific actions that we do. So I want to talk about that in a second.
Okay.
Another thing I realized, it can be very helpful when we're sharing art of in any form. Our society is so into comparing art and criticizing art and American Idol and who is the best, who got the most hits, who did this, and I think we really need to kind of reaffirm or reconnect people to in what realm are we playing for them. Like if I'm a fledgling player,
Mm-hmm.
I need to be clear. I'm not trying to impress you.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be important not to apologize for what I'm doing, but to give it a context that this is, this is all about connection, and it's all about not, it's not all about my life right now isn't all about connection, not perfection. So I'm sending you something totally imperfect, with the beauty of imperfection. I'm sharing, and whether we actually say that to someone, or whether we say it inside ourselves, or whether we say this, I don't know how to say it, because I don't know how to do it in a way that's not, I don't want people to say, like, now I want you to know the harp is the hardest instrument in the entire world to play, and it takes, whatever. And so every note that I play is, but
Yeah, you don't want people to be apologizing because
right,
that somehow is demeaning to them.
right. But I do want, whenever we, and this is one reason I think it's so important, um, for me, and to teach how to speak and talk when we're playing, so that we don't just present ourselves as in, oh, look how well I can play, because
Mm.
that's irrelevant. What's relevant is, what am I trying to say with this? What am I doing? So, for example, um, I have students, over 100 students, and they're of all different levels. And one of them had a real breakthrough, where she presented a project. We were looking at everyone's projects, and she had a project where she's a fledgling player. She's she's not, but she wanted to read a poem and play.
Mm.
And she had this beautiful poem, and she found a beautiful something, just that, as beautiful as that. And she read the poem, and then occasionally she would, that was all she did. All she did. And it was breathtaking. And she had found the way to marry her current technical ability to what she wanted to express in her heart. And there was no better way to do what she did. You could not add 50 years of harp technique and improve what she did. If people, and we can't always find that sweet spot where we are bringing who we are, where the harp is the platform, the perfect platform for who we really are. I mean, it can take years to find that. But by there was something about what she did, that there was nobody would ever question her harp playing, because that's not what it was about. It was about that the harp was helping her to express what she wanted to express. And that's what I would like to be able to have each person be able to find a way to take the, anyway, I don't know what I'm saying here. Maybe you know what I'm saying.
Well, I think what you're talking about is the power of music as an expression of soul. And I believe soul holds all three of those centers together on the spiritual plane. And so, what I think you're talking about is, instead of the heart being an exercise of the head, where you have to get the technique just right and
Right.
you have to compare yourself to this person or that person, or the heart being just an expression of your emotional self, where you just get on there and do whatever without any sense of connection to what else is going on inside of you,
Uh-huh.
or that you're using the harp really to allow the energy of soul to flow out. And Angeles Arian, who was a cultural anthropologist, who was a spiritual teacher, she always said that there are four universal healing salves: singing, dancing, storytelling, and solitude. Singing, dancing, and storytelling are all what you're talking about with the holiday Christmas card. Because there's a dancing of the hands on the harp.
Right.
There's the dancing of the movement from grounding with the harp to connecting vis-a-vis the camera with people, to back to connecting. There's this beautiful movement. And there is this singing that comes from the instrument and from the voice. And there's the storytelling of the sentiment of the harp. And then there is the solitude that it comes from within oneself. And there, I believe, is where the vulnerability shows up. Because we realize I'm doing this solely from my own nature.
You're also making me realize that there is a way to do it. Like if we turn to our instrument, no matter what we play, if we are in solitude or in connection with that instrument, that the simplest thing we can play that that can be beautiful.
Yes.
So wow. So I'm realizing that the connection in doing a tiny project like this and doing it over and over and over again is connecting with other humans, but also connecting with ourselves, also connecting with our instrument, also connecting with sound, also connecting with solitude, also connecting with the meaning of what holidays are, and what that means the rest of the time when it's not a holiday. I mean, it can be just a complete opportunity to explore connection on every level.
Yes. 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 And that simple principle again of starting with grounding, that when we sit down with our harp, or we sit down with ourself for meditation, or we sit down to dinner with someone we're just getting to know, or we sit down to have a phone call with someone we're just getting to know, or someone we've known for 50 years, that we start by finding the grounding note, the ground within ourself, the ground with the instrument, symbolically or literally if we're going to play. And then we find that place of flourishing. Where is our energy just flowing effortlessly? And if we do that, then we're ready to show up for connection. And the truth of the matter with other people, just like on days when we sit down to play our instrument, like the harp, sometimes we feel that connection instantly and there's a mutual flow. And other times we're like, my God, nothing's happening here. It's like stop and go. And that's okay. That's okay. We don't have to force it because the kind of connection we are talking about cannot be forced. It cannot be subjected to an ego-driven timeline.
Right. And I realize it also can't be crafted.
That's right.
So, for example, I'm teaching a formula in which any part of it can be put in a different order, or it can be, it can be exchanged for something else, so that you have enough structure so that you're not worried about the next thing you're doing, and yet enough flexibility that you can start to be able to respond to the inner.
Yes. Yes. And I know that in the strings of passion, structure, I think, is the second. It's impulse, then structure, because we do need structures to feel safe enough to let our energy flourish or flow from the ground of our being. And so having that kind of structure, and in terms of psychological development, that we're talking about having a self, having a sense of self where we know where we start and stop, we know what's us and what's not us,
So
we're
that
able to
brings
feel
me
bound.
that's that sense of, oh wow. What I'm hearing you talk about is, as we begin to get a sense of ourself, then we can be in concert with others. We can actually have that connection. And so let me just go back to this other thing that you said that was so interesting, which is relationships can either help heal our childhood wounds, which I think then bring us forth as a separate person, meaning someone we, if you're healing my wounds, you're going to see me in a different way than if you're triggering my wounds. The person who comes out is going to be not me now.
Yeah, so this is it's a somatic thing, but I think it's important. I don't think we can heal each other's wounds, but I do think we can relate in a way that helps create conditions both in the outer world and in one's inner world where something different can happen and they can become more whole or healed. So, for instance, if in intimate relationship is a perfect example, you know, if John and I react to each other's idiosyncrasies that are rooted in early primitive fears with kind of a loving eye toward understanding, and we just make space for it and we don't get critical of one another, we don't shame one another because of it, we don't push one another to do things, but we just kind of accept, okay, this is just part of the way they move in the world. Then we can respond to each other in a way that we keep compassionate presence. And it's a paradox because then once one of us receives that compassionate presence from the other, something of where we're caught in the past, wound, and fear begins to dissolve because we realize that's not the truth anymore. That might have been the truth then, but it's not the truth. It's not the reality now. And so, in that way, how we respond to one another is so important. And it's tragic when we look at how people respond to each other in ways that instead of doing that, they further the getting stuck and feeling shame and guilt. And we only have to read the newspapers to see how this goes on all the time,
Right,
collectively, in big ways and then in little ways.
right.
So, how we relate to each other is always having an impact. And we're either relating in a way that allows and makes space for the other to be whoever they are in whatever moment they are, and to say, okay, I'm here, not judging you about that, I'm here. Or we're reacting in a way that shames and guilt. Now, let me say this: connecting in a way that holds space for another person does not mean that we're going to keep ourselves in relationships where we're getting hurt or where we're giving and it's one-sided and we're not getting back what we want or need. So I'm not talking that's a different animal. That's a different phenomena. But I want to just say that because I don't want anyone to misconstrue what I'm saying and all of a sudden become tolerant of people mistreating you or, saying ugly things to you at Christmas. In that regard, let's just say you're with family and the same old kind of critical, negating things get triggered, then the way you can have compassionate presence for yourself and them is just to say, you know what, this isn't working for me and I'm going to excuse myself.
Mm.
I'll be back when we can go on to a different way of relating. And you end the conversation, you leave the room. So compassionate presence doesn't mean that we go along with or we go along with other people mistreating us.
So I'm thinking of the context in which I'm not going to be with anybody. I mean, and many of the people that I'm teaching this to, it's because we can't even physically be together. So I totally hear what you're saying, and I love it about, you know, us, and I'm sure it's about there's a learning curve to learning how to communicate to people that way. And I'm thinking about, I'm telling people to send this vulnerable, beautiful, expression of love, and how can they protect themselves emotionally if what comes back is not always beautiful. Like it's beautiful because right in a class, I taught people how to do it, and somebody sent I taught a Hebrew song, and she sent it off to her sister-in-law, and she said, like right on the break, she did it, and she said that when her sister-in-law got it, she was almost crying, and she just loved it so much. I mean, so this can happen really fast. It's not a huge project, but I know that there are going to be times when there is no response, or when the response isn't that beautiful. And how can people not wound themselves with the response that they get?
So we have to check our storyline. Just like I had to check my own internal persecutory ideas about what had happened with the situation I referenced,
Uh-huh.
we have to be aware that if someone doesn't respond, it may mean nothing about what they thought about or how they felt about our card. It just means they didn't respond. Maybe they got caught up because their fire alarm went off and they never got back to the email. Maybe their dog suddenly needed to go out for a potty break. I mean, we don't know why they didn't respond. So often what happens is the wounding happens because of the stories we tell ourselves about why someone did or didn't do something. So that's the first thing, is we have to check our own storylines and realize we don't know. If they didn't respond, we don't know what that means. I think the second thing we have to do, if someone sends something that is overtly critical, then that probably means if I read it or you read it or anyone else watching read it, they would also feel the criticism.
Mhm.
So sometimes it can be helpful to have a trusted friend read it and say, "Hey, do you hear this the way I do?" Um, and I know sometimes I'm thinking about my sister, who's a finance person, and here I am, a psychoanalyst, feeling touchy. We sometimes hear things in different ways. When I'll say somebody said this, and she's like, "Oh, well, that's just business," and it means nothing to her emotionally, but I'm all reading all this stuff. So it can be really helpful, again, to kind of get some objective input. The second thing is that if it is overtly critical, then you can decide to not respond. You can make sure you mark that person off your holiday list for next year. You can shoot back an email and say, "Wow, that felt really critical to me. Is that what you meant?" And what you do is going to depend on several factors. It'll depend on how grounded you are in your own being, how much your whole self is in charge versus one part that's going to be devastated and cause you to collapse if you don't get what you want.
Mhm.
It's one thing if we're in our whole self and 1/10 of us doesn't get what we want, but the rest of us stays intact, than if we're just caught in that one place. Um, and then based on their response, we can determine what do we do next. But I think part of the key is the idea, it's again a paradox. We need each other, but there's a way where so much of our adult relationships, we still act as if we have the same need we had as an infant child, where we were helpless and dependent and unable to take care of ourselves, unable to self-soothe. But the truth is, as adults, part of mental health and physical health on every plane, is being able to take care of ourselves. That we can self-soothe, we can protect ourselves. If I need something or I'm hurting, I can pick myself up and move somewhere else.
Mhm. You also made me think, it just occurred to me that there's another thing we can do, which is if we get back a response that is critical or subtly critical or whatever like that, and we can actually use that as an opportunity to see what we feel,
Yeah.
how we're triggered, and begin to understand this isn't a wonderful, simple example of why I may be afraid to express myself more. So I'm going to take this. I'm going to share this. I'm not going to go crazy with it, but I'm going to observe it and think, okay, this is a clue. This is going to help me understand what I need to untangle in order to be more expressive, or the people that I can love but not necessarily reach out to, or the fact that I am still trying to get approval from my mother, father, sister, whatever, and that's something that I can work on. And so instead of feeling that as we do express ourselves, we're opening ourselves up for abuse. Or and I just got to say, it happens rarely.
Right.
Usually people are just like moved. But even if we're just afraid to do it, that this is a great opportunity for us to, in a very simple way, actually start to understand more about that. Because if we're afraid of it, and if it's holding back, it's holding us back in every part of our lives.
That's right.
And this is a chance to start untangling it.
That's right. Absolutely. And the people in our life who are going to be the people who help us heal are the people who can stay in relationship with us around that in a way that they love, that they bring compassionate presence to us. Yeah. And so this is how we begin to discern who are we going to keep in our life and who aren't we? you know, is there an ability to really come together in a way where we do love one another, which again, I'm defining as having compassionate presence for each other.
Wow, I'm also realizing that it's an incredible opportunity for realizing where the resonance of love is in
Mhm.
our lives and where it isn't, and how we can actually start sending more things to the people that we resonate well with. Wow. I can see that our time is getting close to being done. And, when we jumped into this today and we knew that this might ramble all over, but that it was all about kind of unpacking it and trying to figure out what is in this, what is in this. And I just feel like I've gotten so much in terms of understanding that a simple communication of love has so can have so much fear and can have so much to help us. And it's I realize it is a gift to ourselves to take the time to create something, to reach out, because it is going to enrich our lives and our understanding of ourselves and our ability to connect and reach out to others. So I thank you, Kathleen.
You're welcome. Yeah, and it is really the power and what we might call the magic of having compassionate presence with oneself. Because then whatever we do, we are enriched, regardless of how the other person responds.
Right. That's right. We're going to be enriched by the process. And that's the other thing I got out of this, is to actually go back and look at the exercise or the formula and make sure that I am putting in those connection points.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
That's round, flourish, and connect.
right. Yes. Kathleen, thank you so much. I just always enjoy the adventure of these conversations.
Yes, it is always an adventure, and I
Yes,
love it too.
yes. And I'll see you next week.
Okay, bye bye.
Thanks so much. Bye bye.